So is the mic fine? Good. So I'm Øyvind Vennerød from Menon Economics. I'll present the, let's see here, analytical findings of the project, and there's 5 phases that we look at here, or 5 different points. So I'll start off by talking a bit about what drives regional competitiveness for green energy-intensive industries. So we've set up 5 different pillars and collected a lot of indicators to identify what the 3 regions in Kvarken are good at and what they are bad at with regards to attracting these industries. These matter to different levels for different industries, and that's why they'll come back to in the 4th point here, where we match the industries with the regions. But before we do that, I'll talk a little bit about what different industries need from the regions and what benefits they can give if they are successfully established. After we've done that, I'll then take some key takeaways from the analysis before I give the word over to Eric for some policy pointers. So, what drives regional competitiveness for green energy-intensive industries? We've set up 5 different framework with 5 pillars. Those 5 pillars are energy, one, workforce and skills, both with regards to the ones in the region and those which are need to move into the region, as well as the market accessibility, how easily you can reach markets and source your products from abroad. The ecosystem and financing, that's both the getting financing and the business ecosystem, as well as the institutions, goes into this pillar. And finally, innovation and R&D, because these are rapidly developing industries which are technologically advanced. So what we've done is we have collected over 50 different indicators for each of these 5 pillars in total to create a pan-European ranking to show what are the strengths and weaknesses of each part of Europe. Now, what we really care about isn't the other parts of Europe, but those are the competition for attracting these energy-intensive industries. And therefore, we made this in order to focus on the 3 regions of Västerbotten, Västernorrland, and Västerbotten. And the results of that are shown in this figure. So what you see here is a spider chart, where the further out you are, the stronger you are in this sub-pillar. If you have on the dotted line of 100, then you are the median region in Europe. So essentially you're average in Europe on this. If you're out on 200, then you're the best in Europe on every sub-indicator, so then you're very strong on this. If you'd been at 0, you're the worst at every single one. And what you can see here is a number of things. One, many of the strengths and weaknesses are quite similar between the 3 regions in Kvarken. The similarities are much larger than the differences. Secondly, we see that the key strength here is the energy pillar, especially with regards to prices, but also with regards to the renewable share, which is important for several industries. A somewhat weaker point is the access and build-out, especially driven by the fact that Sweden and Finland have weaker ambitions for building out renewables compared to the existing amount of renewables in the region than other countries in Europe do. This means that some of the advantages that we see in price and renewables is likely to diminish going forward. We also see a comparative weakness in workforce in the region. That's not really because of lacking skills. It's more driven by many of these industries being very employment intensive. Therefore, being sparsely populated is a challenge. That's what we've seen in some of the establishments as well, right? When you need to get people to move in to the establishments, that's a challenge that other regions in Europe don't face to the same extent. Final point here is on market access. This is also a challenge because you are far away from the main markets in Europe and the ports are comparatively small and poorly connected. An important point here, which especially the people we had workshops in all of the regions and especially in Västerbotten, they highlighted this. This doesn't matter that much to all of the industries that I'll show you later. It matters more to the ones that need to source goods globally and export to a variety of markets and less to some of the others. But I'll get back to that when I go into the industries in the next part. So that was the first part, the regional part. And then we do first the regional, and then the industry, and then combine them. So the industry part is, what can these industries give to their host regions? And there we've set up a framework using 3 different parts. So you have the so-called direct effects. These are the benefits that come from the industrial establishment's activities in itself. So the employment and value creation that happens in the manufacturing plant, in the data center, and so on. Then you have the upstream effects. These are the effects that come from people who, or from companies that supply the new establishments, right? From those who deliver goods and services to it, both from existing suppliers in the region and from new catalyzed suppliers, or in other words, those that establish themselves in the region because of the presence of the new establishment. So we've quantified the direct effects based on past establishments and planned establishments, while we quantify the upstream ones based on an economic impact model. We also discuss downstream effects, which include cluster effects, spillovers, industrial symbiosis that these industries can contribute to. So we've selected 12 industries. I won't spend too much time on the process, but they all contribute to the green transition, and they're all energy intensive and can gain foothold in the region over the next decade. And here we see some findings. So along the x-axis here, you see all the 12 industries that we analyze. And one thing that people often don't think enough about is that there's a huge difference in employment needs between these industries. The figures we show here in blue are the direct employment at the plant for a globally competitive plant. And what we mean by a globally competitive plant is that you can't really have a small version of many of these industries. For instance, battery cell production or hydrogen-based refining of metal production, such as green steel, you can't have one with just 100 employees. That's not cost-effective in the global competition. So they have to be large, but many of the other ones will often be small, such as hydrogen production, will rarely employ many people. A second variation that often under-communicated is how these are all energy-intensive industries, but how energy-intensive they are varies a lot. Some of the ones to the left here have a lot of employees compared to the power use. That's because they are not all that energy-intensive for an energy-intensive industry. But the ones on the right, hydrogen production, data centers, hydrogen derivatives, they're extremely energy-intensive and have very little employment compared to the energy use. The figures I've shown here have one bar for the indirect regional effects. So just to remind you, that's the value creation and employment coming from purchases, for local purchases and delivering goods and services to the new industry. This also varies depending on where the industry is located. While data center will have the same employment and value creation in the different regions, they will have different purchases locally depending on the existing business ecosystem. And we see differences here both between the industries, which you see how many employees they have compared to the direct effects. And we also see differences between the region. And that depends on the existing business ecosystem, where we'll have larger effects from the bioindustries, for instance, in Västernorrland, larger effects from hydrogen-based metal production in Västerbotten, and larger effects from the industries using electronics in Västerbotten. Final graph on this part is on labor productivity. All of these industries are more productive than the average Kvarken employment. So labor productivity, that's how much value you create per employee, and they're all expected to be higher than the current average in the region. But there's a large variation between them. And those that have the highest labor productivity are usually the ones that use much of other inputs, such as capital or energy, and less of labor. Another point that we go into a bit here is uncertainty and risk. I won't go into this whole matrix here, but there are multiple different forms of risk that these industries have. And much of this risk is entirely outside of the control of both the company and the region. Right, there are global market trends and things, subsidies happening in other countries, which can affect the success of the establishment regardless of what you do. That's especially big if you're trying, especially important point when you're trying to make a cornerstone industry in a small municipality. That entirely outside risk factors can affect you substantially. So that was the regional perspective and the industry perspective. And then we combine these to show you a matrix of which industries fit well for each region. And I'm going to show you just for the Kvarken region today. So for all of the 3 counties combined, but in the report we have it for each region separately. So what we're going to show you here is how competitive is the region in terms of attracting this industry. You'll see that along the horizontal axis, and then along the vertical axis, you'll see how large the expected benefits of the establishment are, provided that it establishes itself there. That's an index weighted between the direct effects, upstream effects, and downstream effects. It looks like this, and I'll add some circles to showcase the point here. So you see here along the horizontal axis, if you're at the very right end, then you're the most competitive region in Europe. If you're to the very left, then you're median in Europe. There are none to the left of the median because you are above median attractive for all the industries here. To the very right here, we see data centers. And data centers are the industry for which the Kvarken region is the most competitive, especially the 2 Swedish ones. And they are in the top 10 regions in Europe, which are the most competitive for data centers, due to the low reliable energy prices and as well as the weather. And also because some of the comparative challenges of the regions, such as employment, so being sparsely populated, and market access, are not as important for data centers. But the expected regional benefits of a successful establishment are lower. They have a high labor productivity, but they employ fewer people. They have relatively limited local purchases compared to some of the other industries, and they also have smaller downstream effects. If we look a little bit up to the left, we see in the blue circle, we see the 2 hydrogen industries. They have many similarities. They're also highly energy intensive, have relatively low employment directly and low purchases, but a much larger potential for creating downstream effects, so cluster effects, hydrogen valleys, spillovers, and so on. A little bit up, we see a cluster in red of 4 industries, which are the ones that the Kvarken region is both highly competitive for and which will create very large effects if successfully established. We see some variation, which we can't see in this figure because it's for Kvarken as a whole, between the 3 regions here, where Västernorrland has especially large effects for the bio industry, so biofuels and biochemicals. Västerbotten for active battery materials, and Västerbotten for the hydrogen-based refining of metals. But while there are some differences here, the similarities between the 3 regions are much larger when compared with the rest of Europe. So there are few regions that are as similar to each other than you are. You're much closer to each other than the other ones. I'm going to finish off now with some key takeaways from the analysis. The first one is that the green transition creates a window of opportunity for reindustrialization. So the fact that you have cheap renewable energy is not new, but it's much more important for attracting industries now than it was a decade ago. It's also much more important now than it's going to be in 20 years. Because in 20 years, the rest of Europe will also have much more renewable energy, and prices may converge, at least according to many forecasts. So it's certainly much more important now than it was before, and it may be less important in the future, which creates a window of opportunity now. And despite some structural challenges, the Kvarken region is among the most attractive not 3 regions, so that's similarly sized regions as the countries here, right, in Europe, for many of these industries, or even for most of these industries. Third, there are a lot bigger variations between different energy-intensive industries than people often think about, both in terms of the benefits that they give. Some have very high employment, others are very labor productive, others yet can create large spillover effects. And this is sometimes under-communicated and not thought enough about. Especially the spillover effects mattering for decision is the important point there. And then, just as the benefits vary, so do the required inputs. Like we saw here with regards to both employment and energy, but also with regards to capital, the differences between the industries are very large. And that means that regions need to think about, what is my constraining factor? What is it really that we lack in our region? Is it Do we want to utilize the power that we have as best we can and maximize the benefits from that? Or do we want to maximize the people that we have because that's our main limit? That's an important point to have in mind when creating these strategies. And that's both at the regional level, but also to an extent at the municipal level. And then the investment risks are substantial, and they vary between different, and they rely also on factors entirely outside of the region's and companies' control. And there is a concern that many of these risks are borne at the regional level. So if something goes wrong, that's painful at the regional level, and you put a lot of emphasis into that. But many of these benefits accrue nationally in terms of taxes, or at the European level in terms that these are industries which are strategically important for Europe. And that's a potential mismatch. And that kind of goes into the final point, which is that EU-level support is essential. Essentially, we need to achieve European goals. These investments need to happen somewhere, and the Kvarken region is among the most attractive for them. And with that, I think I'll give the word to Eric for some policy pointers.